Hi, I'm Dr. Karen Janes, an energy healer and psychologist based in the UK. Welcome to the Life Made Easier podcast. We're going to be talking about energy, emotion, and awareness and how they shape the way we live. Each week, we talk about energy and healing, look at how understanding energy can help with your relationships, with stress and decision making in your real life. We believe that when you understand your own energy and the energy around you better, things start to feel clearer and much more manageable.
We absolutely do believe that. I'm Dr. Tiffany Hunter, and the other thing that we believe in are energy vampires. Energy vampires, energy manipulators, energy sponges, people in your life who take, or make it very difficult for you to build energy yourself. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to be talking about this week. What are they? How does it work? And what can you do about it?
So maybe we should start with, let's backtrack a little. I mean, you've kind of outed us in terms of what we do.
I've added a.
But let's backtrack. Like, is it possible for someone to use their energy to manipulate? And if so, how are they doing that? That's
Yes,
maybe a good place
I've
to start.
totally outed us as believers of that. Yes, I think that there would be absolutely no reason for us to be doing this podcast or how our businesses have the businesses that we have if we didn't believe that energy can affect us. And if we didn't believe that we can manipulate energy, that other people can manipulate energy, and that those manipulations have an effect for good or for challenging.
Yeah, and we've talked about it a bit, haven't we, in terms of environments on previous episodes, how being at like different places can impact our energy and how we feel. And we might not always be aware that it's our energy that's being affected. It might show up physically, like I feel really tired and drained, or suddenly things feel achy or something like that. Or it could also show up emotionally, like, so I was feeling okay and now I'm feeling a bit down, or I'm suddenly feeling anxious and I don't know why. And kind of converse to that, we also often suggest, if you need some help being more balanced or grounded or whatever, or just to lift your energy a little bit, go outside in nature, go to somewhere that feels good for you. So that's kind of more environmental, I guess. But I think we wanted to talk about this as well because we'd done a previous episode on setting boundaries and saying no, and we touched on this topic a little bit there. So yeah, it'd be good to kind of dig into that a bit more. So Tiffany, how would you describe what's actually happening when somebody is using their energy to manipulate someone else?
Before I answer that, you got me thinking. I hadn't even put the connection together that we've talked extensively about how the energy in our environment affects us. And this really is the follow on about how the energy of people affect. Obviously, people are the environment. Well, I think this is not always the case, and we should talk about the exceptions. But before we get to zebras, let's talk about horses. I think most of the time what's happening is that people are pushing our buttons and getting us to respond in a particular way, or they're spreading the world with their charm and their joy, and that was sarcasm for those that might have missed it, all around us, and then that's having an effect on our energy.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah.
How would you describe it?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about how the physically, if we were, my apologies for those of you who are just listening to this and not watching, when someone's kind of prodding you, literally like prodding you with their finger, you see kids do it often to their parents, don't you? Come on, or pulling on your coat, like, can we go? Can we like and so they're either pushing at you or pulling at you, and it's like that's something you could do physically to somebody, but it's like there's an energy equivalent of that where
Mm-hmm.
some part of their energy is actually trying to grab hold of a part of your energy and either pull it or actually even take some of it,
Mm-hmm.
and to sort of get in past your defenses somehow and suck you out stuff that maybe you might prefer to keep. But also, like both ways around, they may also be prodding at you, pushing at you. Again, some part of their energy,
Yeah.
and you might see that in a more like verbal way when someone's kind of goading somebody. Like you see it sometimes, I don't know, in the pub or in sports situations, someone's like really spoiling for a fight and they're kind of deliberately saying stuff that they know
Mhm.
is likely to trigger a reaction. I mean, that's when it's happening in a very overt way. And there's kind of an energy that goes with that. Like I'm kind of pushing that energy,
Mhm.
or the energy that might trigger, like if I know you have a particularly strong feeling about something, that you're likely to get upset if I prod you about it. um
What you said about overt is really interesting because
Mm.
in some ways the people who are overt are easier, right? Somebody who's constantly complaining and leaving big giant piles of poo all over them, energetic poo all over the place, and sort of coating you with all of that, are they're so obvious that you can really see that happening. Or even somebody who says or does something that you can feel your trigger go, in that moment where your reactivity spikes and the adrenaline is going and you're like, "Argh!" and you go from 0 to 60. That's such an obvious reaction. You can really see those happening, and that makes it easier to take care of. I think the people who are more subtle at it, I think, are even harder. The people who are just using pure energy. And sometimes they're easy to spot, right? Because they're smiling at you and giving you all the niceties, but you can just feel the fakeness or the passive aggressiveness underneath it. But I don't know that that's always true. I think sometimes people's behavior and their energy really are doing two different things. And their energy is, as you say, a part of them is going towards you and having an effect on the energy. And then we're being affected by that. And we're having reactions differently than we would have if we were left to our own devices. And those are much subtler and harder to work with.
Yeah, I feel like I'm really thinking about various people I've known over the years that
As,
have
as we all are, us and every single person listening to us.
yeah, and there's those people who, like, there's one particular person of a sort of vague acquaintance that I've a number of times spent a bit of time around, and one of those people that just, there's always something kind of to, oh, this happened and then that happened and then this terrible thing and bad things are
Right.
always happening to me. And it's weird because as you were talking, I was thinking about, there are plenty of other people in my life who can be telling me about something, crap that's happening to them, and I don't feel drained by it. I mean, we spend our professional lives listening to people talking about the things they're struggling with, and it doesn't feel like an energy suck in the way that
True. That's true.
sometimes there just are some people who it's like they see negative in everything. And it can start to feel really hard to be around. But there are times when you're very aware that's happening. You're kind of almost watching it happen, and maybe you're feeling, I can't wait to make my excuse and get away from this
Mhm.
person. How long do I have to stay here to be, without being too rude or whatever? And then there might be other people, maybe you don't even realize, but afterwards you're kind of like, I don't really know what happened today, but I just feel wiped. And
Mhm.
you may not even connect it with that person you were spending time with. Or you might afterwards, when you come away and go, oh God, actually it was really hard work being around that person. I feel a bit drained now. But you might not even realize. And one of the things I think is really noticeable in my practice, and I'm guessing it's probably similar in yours, Tiffany, is that a lot of the people who are likely to come and see us are people who often tend to assume things are their fault. So
Yeah.
if I, get home in the evening and I'm like, oh, I feel really rubbish. What did I do wrong? What should I be doing better? What have I done that's messed myself up? Or I think that's much more likely to be a default reaction, rather than maybe someone I was spending time with today has
Mhm.
impacted me negatively.
Mhm. You said that the people that come to see us tend to blame themselves first. And in my head, I translated that to, yeah, spiritual seekers. And then a little voice in my head said, no, it's women.
Well, yeah, yeah,
We
yes,
tend to see women, and that tends to be women.
yeah, that's
Um,
so true.
I think what you make a really good point of saying implicitly that I want to make explicit is that there's energy of an object, there's energy of the environment, there's energy of a person, there's also energy of a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So the words coming out of my mouth can be exactly the same. You know, they could be technically complaints. This is going wrong. This is going wrong. But if the energy of that conversation is, you know, I'm always impressed when people walk in our door, you know, even if they've been to 6 different people before us and not got good results, they're still taking a deep breath and walking in the door with at least enough hope to walk through that door. So the energy of those conversations are mixed with, can you help? I'm hoping you can help is really the energy behind that. And there's nothing draining about that versus somebody else that's having the exact same words. And the energy of that conversation could be very, I love the image that you gave of the kid kind of pulling on you, kind of like, you have to fix this. You have to save me. You have to do something. This is your responsibility, which obviously is very draining. Or even just somebody who doesn't want, they don't want any help. They just don't even, you're almost an object that they're talking to, that they're just talking to an audience.
Sounding board, kind of.
Yeah, you're just the 2-dimensional face that they are talking at. And those are also very draining too.
Or even more than that, I think sometimes there's people who you feel like your job is to agree with how terrible their life is and how little the control they have about changing anything. They got that kind of real woe is me, sort of poor me sort of feeling that isn't just, I mean, we can all have moments like that. But it has that real draining kind of, you don't want me, and anything you say that might be vaguely kind of encouraging or even sympathizing, it's like it just falls into a black hole. It's kind of
I'm really glad you said that, because I think looking for agreement is a very common thing that people are trying to do, whether or not they're complaining or whether or not they're venting, but that looking for, I need you to agree with me. And there's often a very strong energetic pressure to agree with them that they're really, that they're throwing at you.
Yeah. Do you think people always know they're doing it?
No, I don't think so. I think if you stopped somebody and said, do you realize that you're complaining a lot? They might say yes. I think if you say, do you realize that nothing out of your mouth the last 4 times I've seen you has been remotely positive? They might say yes. But I think if you said, do you realize that you're using your energy to try to manipulate me to agree with you or solve your problems, I don't know many people who are going to say yes to that.
But I guess you could be doing that more. Like, I think there are people who are prodding you to try and, like you were saying, get you to agree or get you to do something in particular, like pulling the guilt strings, the energy guilt strings, like, I need you to do this for me to show you love me, kind of thing. Transaction that can be very overt and obvious in a verbal or physical way, or can be much more subtle, like people's words might be saying, no, it's fine for you to stay home, but actually everything about them is saying, I really, really want you to come with me.
Yeah, and I want to, if I can interrupt you for a second, because you just used a turn of phrase, pulling on the guilt strings, the energetic guilt strings. And I want to go back to that for a second, because I want to make it clear that when we say that, we don't mean metaphorically. We mean that somebody's actually using their energy to find the guilt energy in you, and they're pushing or pulling on that energy inside of you to get you to act in a certain way. So yes, it's true metaphorical, but just to be clear, we're actually being quite literal.
Well, we were talking about how do people know they're doing it, and you know, so I think sometimes there is a more deliberate purpose kind of goal, like I'm trying to get you to feel sorry for me, or I'm trying to get you to do something because I want you to do it. But other times maybe there isn't a goal so much. Yeah, it's more of a kind of just a draining of your energy, which kind of leads us to the question of, is like, are all these types of people we're talking about energy vampires? Will we call them?
Right.
We use that term in the very introduction. You said we believe in energy vampires.
We do.
So maybe we should also define that a little bit more clearly, because I feel like we're talking about a number of different scenarios or types of people or types of behavior. Let's say people can energetic behavior that people can engage in
Yeah.
that aren't necessarily all the same thing.
I think the word that you hear people use a lot is energy vampire as a kind of catch-all casual reference to people who take your energy. And hopefully what we're doing is giving people information so they can get really specific about how different people do that, so that we can then have a more sensible conversation in a moment about what we can do about it. But an energy vampire, I mean, if we're going to be literal about it, comes from the idea that a vampire needs something from somebody else in order to survive. Right, an energetic source, by their blood in the fictional vampires or something. And I think that's how you and I are using it, yeah? That there are people who have actually disturbance in their energy anatomy that means that they do require energy from outside of them in a way that other people don't. And if you're not careful, they will absorb it from you.
Do you think people who are like psychopaths, sociopaths would fall
Gosh,
in?
that's a great question.
I mean, I don't know if I've ever met one.
I don't know that I've ever met one either. Narcissist, sure, but an actual true sociopath, or I don't know.
And not because narcissists, there's that kind of feeling like emotionally, I need you to sort of prop me up all the time. But I think you're right. That's really really interesting. I think you're right that there is an energetic component to that. I need you to feed me. I've heard people in the world of talking about narcissism and narcissistic relationships. I've heard people talk about the supply, like they need a supply of people who will do their bidding, who will
Right.
respond to them and help
I
them.
mean, what's also interesting about that is people, I think often people who we're kind of calling more energy sponges, people who need dopamine hit, need from other people, that other people should regulate their emotions and or give them dopamine hits. So they'll pick a fight or they'll do something to get the other person to act in a way that, hit the guilt button or something that gets them to regulate their emotions or give them some kind of dopamine hit, even if it comes through a negative experience like an argument. But I don't think but that behavior is learned and can be unlearned. I think the general feeling about narcissists, clinical psychologist, isn't that narcissists is a neurological condition that cannot be altered?
I don't know. I'd have to look more into the kind of research literature around it, but I think there is an idea that a narcissistic personality can be formed through early experiences, like often extreme neglect or abuse. So I don't know if it's, which I guess, our early experiences from when we're in the womb, but certainly early experiences when we're out the womb, shape how our brain ends up getting wired.
Right.
And that can cause impacts that are pretty much unchangeable, as well as some impacts which are certainly modifiable or completely changeable.
Right.
So I
mean,
don't know if it's necessarily something you're born with, but something that you would becomes a kind of a very solid sort of part of your makeup,
Right.
like
And not necessarily something that you can change the way that you can change what I'm describing, when an expectation that other people regulate your emotions, which is really more of an attachment disorder, an adult attachment disorder.
and also kind of self-esteem, I think, because I think there are some people who can get quite stuck in a sort of, lacking self-esteem. I'm a terrible person who has no worth and I'm constantly seeking validation from others. That is probably something which is certainly possible to work on and change and gradually begin to shift your identity to somebody who does have some value and doesn't need to just get sympathy or some kind of validation from others in order to get attention, or that's I guess a more behavioral, as you say, attachment, that kind of pattern that
Right.
can be changed.
Well, we've talked about zebras before. I think energy vampires being real, but certainly a zebra. I think in the 30, 40 years, gosh, is it really 40 years? A long time that I've been engaged in these ideas, I think maybe I've come across a half a dozen in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somewhere between 4 and 6. How about you? I mean,
Yeah.
they are rare. Whereas this other stuff we're talking about, probably I experience with people every time, from the close people in my life and my family to the cash register at Whole Foods,
Mm-hmm.
all the time. It's super
Mm-hmm.
common. Those kind of folks.
Yeah, and we talked a bit about people who are like really negative people all the time, and how energy sapping that can be, and kind of depressing, and mood altering, emotion impacting. But I think equally, I mean, I've met people who are almost falsely positive, like everything's kind of, I guess I mean, we've talked a bit about toxic positivity in the past, haven't we? But like sometimes you see it in the spiritual kind of worlds, where people are like, oh, we must always love everybody, and we must never feel angry, and we should transcend fear, and we should only embrace our positive emotions and all of that kind of
Let's
stuff.
live at a higher vibration.
And I never judge anybody, and I always, feel love and beauty towards people, which, kind of always sets me a little bit on edge, because I'm kind of like, it's just not
Well,
real.
but they're often hitting you in the energetic metaphorical gut while
Yeah,
they're
and
doing
there's
that.
often underneath, there's a lot of anger and rage sometimes seething away that can't be expressed, that gets so buried. And then the people who are so, I mean, I don't know if this happens more in the UK than America, but the people who are conforming to the social, well, we've all got to be cheerful and we mustn't mention anything that anybody feels uncomfortable about, kind of thing. But it's a lack of authenticity, I think. So
Hmm.
whichever direction it swings in, if someone isn't just embodied and relaxed in themselves, that can create a jarring in energy, which can be draining to be around, which, someone may not be in any way directly manipulating you, yet still it has an impact.
Sure.
It
Yeah.
can
I mean,
be.
I spent 20, 25 years in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, and you see a lot more of that toxic positivity over there and a lot worse energy, as you say, that's underneath it. And I
Mm-hmm.
moved to a very small town in Florida. So you could say that I left the mecca of spirituality and alternative complementary health and moved to a place that never even really heard of it here in Florida. And there's an expression I heard somebody say that I thought is so true, that that people involved in how you describe, they're more nice, they're nicer than the people I'm currently surrounded by, but the people here are more kind.
Right. Yes. Yes. It's like that
Yeah,
nice on the surface kind
yeah,
of, but
yeah,
it's a false
yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a horrible cliche, and I've just dramatically generalized the heck out of both states. But there's some truth to that. There's
Mm.
some truth to it. Cliches exist for a reason.
Yeah. And then I mean, we've sort of mentioned this, but you mentioned slinging poo around, but I think there's the energy sapping and the kind of draining, and the kind of manipulating, like what we were saying about the guilt strings, like I'm trying to prod at you to pull on you to get you to react in a certain way or feel a certain thing that serves my purpose, consciously or unconsciously. But then there's also people who are more actively flinging around negative energy. And I think, again, sometimes this can come from massive insecurity and anxiety, like that's being, that isn't connected to. So it's not like everybody who's anxious or has low self-esteem is flinging energy around. I don't think they are, but they're the people where it's so buried, it's like I'm angry at the world, I'm feeling frustrated in myself, I feel so insecure that I'm just throwing crap around
Yeah.
to kind of
Yeah.
try and make myself feel better, or because I just don't have any control.
And I think that goes back to the question of, do they realize they're doing that? I think the people that are doing things like that, their level, the level that they're thinking about themselves and thinking about their motives and what they want are much more preoccupied with, I need relief from this anxiety. I need some relief from this pain, whatever that pain looks like. I'm just trying to get something done. I'm just trying to get help. There's not a lot of high level self-reflection going on.
Well, and yes, because I think often if once somebody starts reflecting more on themselves, it's harder to keep doing that, because
Yeah.
you become a bit more authentic the more you reflect on yourself.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
does beg the question, how do people know if they themselves are an energy vampire or they are doing this to somebody else?
Question. I I think probably, it might be a bit controversial here. Probably
Ooh, I look forward
most,
to it.
most of us have at some point done at least some of the things we're talking about. I mean, which might be
Yes.
a relatively benign kind of, I really want my friend to, or I really want my sister to lend me her jumper that I really want to wear, and I'm kind of getting a bit antsy because she doesn't want to. Or I mean, I can remember goading my sister when we were little, like to try and get a reaction out of her. And I'm sure there was, I mean, sometimes I was doing it very consciously. I mean, I'm talking about when I was like 8. And then she'd get into trouble, and yeah, and I'm sure there was an energetic component going on there as well.
Yeah,
Um,
but I think that you've just nailed it on the head, and I don't know if it's controversial as much as just sort of embarrassing because
I'm comfortable. And inconvenient too.
it's just exactly because I'm quite sure that I do it with small. I think the thing that comes to mind most are domestic chores with my
Mm,
husband. Right?
yes,
Who's going to take out the garbage? Who's going to do
we're,
the
we're
dishes?
we're both heavily ignoring it for a while, trying to push the other
Yes.
one to do it. You do it
Yeah,
'cause
sort of aware that the other we're both ignoring it and whose tolerance for it is gonna all of those kind of shenanigans that I think in the best relationships you can at least laugh about.
yeah, yeah. And probably, yeah, moments when we felt insecure about something and kind of probed for a compliment or some reassurance, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think that's probably all of us.
Yeah.
I don't
Which
know.
which does which brings us to the most important thing to talk about, which is how do we stop doing this? How do we stop doing it and how do we stop ourselves being manipulated when other people do it?
So maybe if we start with how do we stop doing it?
Yes.
Um, I think what we kind of said about self-reflection, self-honesty, I think some of the things we talk about in terms of looking after our energy, keeping our aura clean and protected, see other podcasts for how to do that. Those things help because it means we're dealing more with what's coming up for us in this moment rather than carrying a load of rubbish around that makes it harder for us to be aware of ourselves and what we're doing. So there's that, I think, but I think the self-reflection beginning to and giving yourself room to say, okay, there will be times when I will feel insecure or annoyed or whatever, and I probably will do this. Then and everybody else will too. The kind of shame of it, I suppose.
I agree with the self-reflection. I would add to that self-acceptance
Hmm.
because what really strikes me, and in fact, and really you just touched on it, is it's the conflict that
Yeah,
makes it, it's the willingness to say straightforwardly, could you please do the dishes? Because I
yeah,
really don't feel like it. I
yeah,
have absolutely no reason. I'm not sick. I'm not too busy. I really just can't face it and I don't want to do it. Do you have the juice to doing it?
yeah.
Because as soon as you do that, you pop all of the underlying conflict and underlying. As soon as you do that, you can't as soon as you make transparent what's there, it's really hard to be manipulating anybody with your energy, because you're not a tea kettle that's about to kind of blow off steam.
Yeah, and I would almost take it a bit further than that. It's about getting better at meeting our own needs
Mm-hmm.
and asking for help and with meeting our needs. So rather than, because then we don't need to manipulate, because we can say, as you say, can you please help me with this? I need this. I'm struggling with this. I feel this. So those situations, again, couples can easily get into, of like a resentment that hasn't been acknowledged, and there's that horrible atmosphere of, yeah, and sometimes who is going to crack first, or in some couples, in relationships that aren't don't have that safety, or that habits, or they haven't been able to work to having a more honest kind of interaction, there might be layers and layers and bags of history of resentments that couldn't ever be spoken,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because I mean, this can happen in all relationships, not just with our partners, but between parents and children, and between all kinds of friends. And I don't dare raise this with you because I'm afraid of how you'll react, or I feel bad for needing this. I think the more honest we can get, both with ourselves and with the others around us, the less we're likely to try and manipulate, because we don't need to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. I think with the self-reflection that allows us to pay attention to the topics, are we consistently complaining? I think if we find ourselves doing that, we should take a moment, again, self-acceptance, and say, why am I circling around this over and over and over again? Is it because I'm not getting the help I need? Is it because I'm not getting the reaction that I'm looking for from this other person? And be willing to say outright, I just really feel crappy right now. I just need to look into somebody else's eyes and say, I feel like crap. And I don't even know what else to say about it. I just need it acknowledged, and maybe they'll make you a cup of tea and to have, because I think sometimes if we're looking to elicit a reaction, and we find that we're just repeating and
Mhm.
it's probably because we're not getting the reaction that we need. And there's nothing wrong with getting the reaction that we need. Maybe we just need a more effective tool than spiraling.
Yeah, and we can do it more overtly and in a more straightforward way, rather than having
Hmm.
to try and make someone do it without asking directly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we've kind of answered that. So, what can we do to stop others affecting us? Can we stop others affecting us? I mean, the first thing that jumps into my head is there may be people in your life that you have to make decisions to spend less time with,
Sure.
because you can't stop them doing it.
Hmm.
And there's certainly people I've encountered over the years that I could cope with them for a certain amount of time, and then if I stayed too long, or spent too much time with them, or saw them too often, then the price for me would start to feel like my defenses got worn down almost.
Sure. I mean, we've talked about it before. There are things we can do to protect our energy, but at the end of the day, we cannot stop ourselves from being porous.
Hmm.
And we can slow the process down, but we can't stop it entirely.
Yeah, you make me think of like, I mean, as you know, I spent a lot of time outside, and it rains a lot in this country, and sometimes you have a coat that you think is waterproof, and it's fine for a while, and then suddenly it's just reached capacity. It can't cope with that amount of water for that amount of time, and it starts seeping in. And you were doing okay for the first hour, or maybe the first 3 hours, and then suddenly the volume just got too overwhelming, and
Hmm.
maybe you need to go away and do something to recharge yourself in between,
Hmm.
or you then spend more time with somebody. Or there might be people you choose to just not spend any time around.
Sure. I love that imagery of a coat. That's so perfect, because I think we've
Mm.
all had that experience. So other than so given that that's actually true, and there's nothing we can do that much we can do about that, um, what we can take a lot more, what we do have a lot more control over are the things that people use against us. I think that is the most common way I see energy manipulators or energy sponges, energy sucks affect people. And it's actually the place that we have the most control over, which is I don't have any guilt strings. I don't have buttons that you can push. Now, I say that like it's so simple, right? But simple is not the same thing as easy. And of course, we all do and we all will probably till the day we die. But the more that you can minimize that, the more robust you will be. So that people can't, that you're kind of, it's sort of water running off a duck's back. They don't have a place that they can get their hooks into you. And I think it's really helpful if you can turn it into a sort of morbid game where it, like, oh, they got me again. Okay, where did I fall down this time? Where was it? Because then you can do a little bit of search, find, and rescue yourself from it.
Yeah, it's like if you've had it, if you realize afterwards you've been really impacted by someone, kind of understanding like what was it that really was triggering me in that situation, and is there anything I can do, which might involve asking someone else for help with, like a therapist or a healer or somebody, to help you shift how you feel. So it's like you get rid of the button, or you greatly reduce the button or the number of buttons that can be pressed. Absolutely. And the other thing that came to my mind was also environment, because I think there might be people that you only see, you meet them for coffee or for lunch rather than inviting them to your home. Maybe you, or rather than going to their home, maybe you have a think about, okay, what environment can I meet this person in? Or is it better if
Oh, I love that. That's a great idea.
is it better if it's just the two of us, because maybe then they're not performing to a crowd? Or maybe it's better if we're in a group, because then it kind of diffuses it a bit. So we can think about the circumstance in which we spend time with them might help us to manage it better or be impacted less.
Yeah, I love that. Well,
And
that's all I
really,
can think of.
yeah, and really be kind to yourself. I feel like we always end on that. Like, maybe, maybe be kind to yourself if you get, if you get affected, like you're
Oh,
human.
yeah.
You will have, as Tiffany said, you'll have buttons that can get pressed. And people, I mean, people who are narcissistic are often really, really skilled at kind of sniffing out the vulnerable places, the insecurities that they can use to manipulate. And that's often how they operate. They can kind of like somehow, and I suspect they do it very unconsciously. They just have a nose for them,
Oh,
and
yeah.
the
And
kind of,
children, if anybody's being triggered by their kids, they also have a nose. They know where it is. You're never going to be completely impervious to it. So it's not a matter of if you go down, it's when you go down. So yeah,
yeah.
be gentle with yourself. And what do they say? Progress, not perfection.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. If you think this has value, please subscribe, because you subscribing makes the algorithm more likely to put us in front of other people. And please, if you have some extra resources, give us a subscribe on Patreon and get access to things like experiments you can do at home and some journaling questions and whatnot. We really deeply appreciate the support.
And maybe share this episode with someone who you think is being impacted by this, or maybe even somebody who you think is going around energy manipulating people. You never know. You might see the light and start changing their ways.
Take
Thanks,
care, everybody.
everybody. Bye.